Good. Let's start it? Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this side event in the SDG Pavilion. So our event is entitled ActNowFilm, Youth Climate Leaders as Agent of Change, the Role of Youth Actions in the SDGs. So my name is Yixian Sun. I'm Associate Professor in International Development at the University of Bath. And one of my key research areas is on the SDGs, especially governance for SDG implementations. And we now know that only 27% of the goals are on track to be achieved by 2030. This is why the United Nations organized a summit of the nature this year in New York, where world leaders agreed on a pact for the future in order to accelerate the implementation of the SDGs. And this pact includes a declaration for future generations, which further recognizes the contributions that young people can and should make to accelerate SDG implementation and solve our climate crisis. And this is exactly the message sent by our ActNowFilm, which our event builds on. So ActNowFilm, let me just briefly introduce, is a film project to promote international youth voices in climate change, run by Cambridge Zero, the University of Cambridge, and also the University of Bath Institute for Policy Research. And this year's film, 2024 version, weaves together the insights of global climate experts with the narratives and action of young people from across the globe. Telling a story of impact and agency, it demonstrates the global and interconnected nature of the climate crisis. It highlights the imperative need for ambitious climate action and the calls for official integration of young people in global climate negotiations. So now let's watch the film's trailer.
What we are negotiating, what we are deciding is not about us. It is about the next generations.
We were talking about youth inclusion for a long time, and now it's high time to speak about meaningful youth inclusion.
Young people from around the world have lived experience of climate change impacts.
We don't even know if in 50 years we'll be able to live on our land.
When Super Typhoon struck, I felt terrified.
In the end, we are speaking of a global crisis.
We can't rule out we've crossed a tipping point.
In the climate negotiation, are they aware about the losses that we are leaving?
Our future depends on decisive and inclusive action.
And the time is now.
We are charged up to fight and bring justice to our world.
If it's our future that's being discussed, we need to be there.
We need to make sure that young people are involved in the negotiation room, but also in the negotiation teams.
Thank you, and of course we'll let you know if you want to how we can watch the full movie. But now, what I want to do is I'm very pleased to have 4 young climate leaders here today across the globe to join this panel. So before I start our conversation, I will let them to briefly introduce themselves. Maybe we can start from there, Nora.
Hi, my name is Nora. I'm Deputy CEO of Climate Outreach. I'm not sure whether I would be considered as a young leader anymore, but I appreciate the compliment there. I grew up in the Maldives, so I'm an islander. I've been in climate activism and advocacy specifically from a very young age. And at Climate Outreach, we really focus on youth participation in our work. And our work is based on social science research and implementing Paris Agreement Article 12, which I'm sure we'll get into a bit more later down the line.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Marina Obaldo. I'm a climate justice activist from the Philippines. I started my climate activism 12 years ago with educating a lot of communities in our community. We are living in the coast of the Philippines, which is on the ring of fire. So we often get struck by by typhoon and other climatic disaster. That's the reason why this advocacy is very personal to me, because I've lost people in my life due to climatic events like the Super Typhoon Haiyan in the Philippines. Then I co-founded the Institute for Youth and Climate Diplomacy, that is empowering youth in Southeast Asia to be part of the climate negotiations. And right now, I just also graduated from my master's in environmental management at Duke University and serving as a regional field director for North Carolina League of Conservation Voters Foundation. Power Up program. So, yeah.
Hi, my name is Mariana. I'm from Portugal, and I have a law degree, and I have an NGO that's called Último Recurso. In English, it would be the last resource or the last appeal, and it uses the law as a tool to fight climate change and hold the main parties of climate change accountable. I'm also the youngest advisor of the President of Portugal on climate change, and I'm always very proud to say that I'm the first person educated in my family. So climate change and inequalities are two things that are very near to me, and I'm very happy to be here. Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is Millie, and I recently graduated from the University of Cambridge studying politics, international relations and anthropology. And now I have the amazing job and privilege to work on the ActNowFilm, which is an amazing film that you just saw the trailer of, and I've been working on this project for a few months now. I additionally am a representative of Climate Talk. Now, Climate Talk is a youth-led NGO non-profit that attempts to demystify climate policy for youth globally. And so it's amazing to be at this panel discussion today, and I really look forward to also having a Q&A session with the audience at the end.
Thank you, everyone. Let's now start our conversation. So I think the format of this panel is we are going to have some questions to our panelists, and then we hope to leave some time for the Q&A. So, because we are talking about the SDGs, so I want to start some questions about the interconnected natures of the SDGs. So I want to give my first question to Mariana. As a well-known youth leader, you already introduced yourself. We saw you in the movie. So can you tell us about your climate advocacy and how this addresses other SDGs?
Yeah, thank you. So I think that talking about law when we talk about climate change usually is not like a clear link between law and climate. But I tried during my, shorted path, I tried to discover what can I do with law and climate. And I found climate litigation, I found climate advocacy where we can use the policy and the law. And I founded this NGO, as I told previous, and the focus of the NGO is to use the law to hold the main parties of climate change accountable. So what we did in Portugal was we looked at the list of the people that were polluting the country, and we chose the first entity that had the more responsibility to protect our rights, our environmental rights. And the first person was the Portuguese state. So in the last year, we sued the Portuguese state for not complying with the national climate law, and we just won the first trial in the Supreme Court. And in a few days, we are going to launch the second climate litigation action, so be aware of that. And I see the law as one of the most critical pillars of democracy and status quo. Everything we do is law, everything we talk, I'm a lawyer, so I can say this, but we are here discussing things that further will be integrated in international law. So if we can find a way to integrate SDG 13 with SDG 17, because when we talk about law, we are talking about peace, institutions, justice, and democracy, we can change the whole society. And IPCC already said that climate litigation is one of the most powerful tools that we have right now to fight climate change, because it's the only tool that when we put someone on the court, they cannot run away from it. And they hate it, like my country hates that he's being sued right now. But we found this is it's really very powerful. I think that's it right now.
Thank you so much first, and also congratulations for the success of your litigation case. As you said, you emphasize these connections between SDG 13, climate action, and SDG 16 on institutions and democracy. I think you give a perfect example. Now let me turn to Nora about your work on climate outreach, because sometimes we know that people are impacted by climate change, they are also connected to the wider social and environmental issues. So can you tell us how do you think climate change can be better addressed in relation to other SDGs? Please give us some examples.
Thank you. So we do research to understand what people think and feel about climate and what are the public concern levels, and we use social science to understand how we can change people's concern into action. So what we know is people are concerned about climate, people care about it, there's no debate about whether people believe it or not. People are alarmed, people want to do something. The challenge we face today in this moment is how do you change their concern into action? So what we're learning and what we're observing is that when it comes to climate narrative and climate communications, we're not quite talking it in a way that resonates with everybody's core beliefs and values and the way they relate to climate. So an interesting study we did is that when we asked a group of people whether they feel like they're experiencing climate change in UK, their sort of, very quick responsive answer was no. But when you dig deeper and when you have a conversation with them, because they work in the paramedics, after a conversation, they were like, yeah, actually I am impacted by climate change. During the heat waves, patients were dying in my ambulance. Therefore, my mental health is affected. So, let's go back to the SDGs and the youth. We know from our research that young people today are feeling very disempowered and are feeling very hopeless and are feeling really, what do we do? What is my future? So when it comes to SDGs, we do need to first find a framework and find a narrative that resonates with their values and in a way that really relates to them. Let's think about the issues young people are facing and worried about now. That's the biggest learning we have at the moment.
Thank you so much. I think you already alluded to our next set of questions, because when we talk about young people, SDGs, and then I think we must think about SDG 4, which is about quality education. So this is why I want to turn my question to Marina, especially your work with the Institute for Youth in Climate Diplomacy. We know that you also put a lot of emphasis on education. So why do you think this is important? And what kind of the work that you have done to really kind of push for SDG 4 hand in hand with SDG 13?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. So the Institute for Youth in Climate Diplomacy actually started as a passion project in 2023. And then we launched in 2024. And we have hosted the first Southeast Asian Youth in Climate Diplomacy Fellowship Program, where we have trained youth from different ASEAN countries to be part of the climate negotiations. So we have invited seasoned negotiators to train our youth, to mentor them, and now some of them are actually in the CUP, and some of them are part of their country delegation. So that is one of the things that we are doing with the Institute. And why is it that we're focusing more on Southeast Asia? Southeast Asia is heavily impacted by the climate crisis, yet the representation, our representation in global dialogue is lacking. We don't have that much representation. And so we aim in IYCD to empower the youth to not just be part of the dialogue, but actually shape the policies, to actually shape the solutions. So we provide them with skills, with tools and knowledge needed to effectively be part of this conversation. And why is it very important that we have the SDG 4? Because knowledge is power. And we want to make sure that we give our youth the foundational knowledge to actually understand the complexities of the climate issues, because we will never be able to give solution to a problem we don't know that is a problem. And it's very important that we simplify these very complex terms and contextualize it to their own language, so that we would know how can we adapt and mitigate to these problems in our own little ways, in our own context, and in our own local situation. So it is very important that there is always knowledge sharing. There is always education. And I feel like I started as an educator. I started in our communities, educating our communities. What is climate change? What are the effects of climate change? What are the causes of climate change? And I felt like maybe I'm past that already. I'm past educating people, but actually that is not true. We will never be past that educating people. Educating people is every day. We have to tell our stories every day. We have to humanize science every day. We have to do storytelling every day, because if statistics, numbers, and graphs is the solution to the climate crisis, we could have already solved the climate crisis. But we're still here on the 29th year of COP, and we're not even near that solution. So we have to continue educating people. We have to continue connecting to people. We have to continue the storytelling. And we have to continue to influence the youth and even our elders, because we forget a lot, right? We forget a lot that climate crisis is here and it is impacting the world, it is impacting us, it is impacting the future generation and the present generation.
Great, thank you so much. I think this is a perfect example of the synergies between different SDGs, especially when we talk about climate actions. You have to educate people, then it's about education as well. So that's why we really have to think about these synergies. And thanks for your work. It's great to see like people trained from your institute are here to represent their country. So now I have a question to Millie about your work with Cambridge Zero. We know that Cambridge Zero has done a lot of projects on training and capacity building. So maybe you can share with us your thoughts on the types of skills that are essential for youth to develop and engage and excel in actions on climate change and also other SDGs.
Thank you very much. I just want to share it is how amazing it is to hear your stories and how much you've engaged with youth in your communities and the outstanding work that you're doing. We really need people like you in the world to really impact communities and ensure that youth are brought into the conversation and are upskilled and have the capacity. And that's one thing I really want to focus on now with quality with education that really links to climate action with the SDGs. They're so interconnected, and we need to ensure that youth don't just know about climate change, they have the knowledge about, essentially what's happening to the world or how their communities are impacted, but it's also taking that knowledge and combining that with skills. And some of the skills that are so essential are storytelling and narrative. And this is something that we've mentioned actually on this panel, is that youth need to know not only, for example, how to write a policy brief or understand a specific area of policy that they feel like they can impact within their community and on a global scale. It's important to know to know not only the skills for communication and also written word when it comes to writing policies on a specific area. It's important that they also know how to weave that into a narrative, how to be convincing when they speak to a politician or when they're in bilaterals. I really encourage youth to go that out to their communities, to their local governments, also if when you access COP, try and set up bilaterals with representatives. And this is something that I did when I was at COP 28, when I was selected as a delegate for the European Young European Leadership. And it was very intimidating being in the same room with members of parliament, but then we worked together as a group within the delegation and wrote our policy briefs and had our points and called leaders out for the fact that they weren't doing enough. And that's an important skill, that youth know the importance of storytelling, that they empowered and feel like they have the confidence to go and have those conversations and influence policy. There are amazing spaces here at COP. Definitely recommend checking out the Children and Youth Pavilion if you haven't. It's a wonderful, wonderful place. And I'm lucky enough to be a steering committee member for that pavilion. And there you can see how youth are really shaping policy and really bringing in the skills regarding narrative and also knowing specific areas within the policy that they want to influence. So it's really important to have those skills. Other skills is also being aware that essentially you have that your value in the space and also your motivations. It's important that these will feed into the skill of, for example, narrative as well. And building networks. Coming to COP is not just about following or shaping negotiations. It's also about connecting with people from across the planet and building up networks to ensure that you can take from the space at COP an international connection with people and other youth to build up movements. So those are some of the skills that we identified as Cambridge Zero from initial youth consultations through the film that you saw the trailer of. And that's something that we identified that youth on the ground, despite being at COP, do need those skills to feel that they have the confidence and the ability and the capacity to know a specific area, to have the skills to write policy briefs, to communicate those policy briefs, and also to communicate it through the form of storytelling. So those are some of the skills that are really important and have been mentioned during this panel as well.
Brilliant. I think there is a very important skill. Sometimes I think we tend to forget how important they are, like storytelling, narratives. I think this is really inspiring, I think, for us to think about as an educator. So what are the skills we need to train our young people? So I think after hearing about your story, now let's think about this space at COP. So why we are talking about this at COP, the role of youth or youth action. So I think part of the rationale of developing this movie or film is also to think about how we can better integrate young people into the formal climate negotiation processes. So I want to also hear your thoughts on this. So let me just ask some questions to each of you. Marinelle, you already shared with us your work on climate diplomacy. So based on your experiences, so what role do youth or young people can and should play in international climate negotiations? We are talking about the multilateral processes.
Yeah, thank you so much. That is a very good question. And I know that for the past COPs and for some events, for the past events as well, we have been seeing a lot of like youth representation in rooms, in spaces that historically are not, that they're not inviting the youth in that spaces before. But it is very important. The role of youth is very important in the international climate policy because our role just goes beyond raising awareness and observing. We are innovators, we are leaders, we can be part of high-level negotiations. Youth have a lot of ideas that we can shape solutions, that we can influence our policymakers. But for us to fulfill that role, we need our policymakers to actually be intentional. To be intentional that youth are actually part of the decision-making tables. That we are not just tokens. That we are not just there to take notes, but actually be listened to and be considered whenever we have ideas and whenever we need to take action. Because, yes, we do have a lot of skills as a youth, but being here and not being there where the decisions are being made doesn't make sense, right? Yeah. There is no policymaker here. There is no negotiator here. We are saying that, yes, youth should have a space on the table, but how are we making sure that there actually is? We have been lobbying with our governments. We have been telling them, hey, give us a party badge. Give us a space at your own delegation. Don't make us use your secretaries to make notes whenever there are bilateral meetings or multilateral meetings. Actually have that sense of what do we actually want from you, because at the end of the day, we will be leaving the consequences of your decisions today. We will be leaving in hopefully 50 years, and we will be showing that we will be educating the next generation of what we have experienced so far and learned so far. If you're not part of that space, how are we going to, to also educate the next generation? And I do think that the youth now is very strong. I think that we have been persisting. I think that we have been reclaiming our rights to a safe environment. I think we have been pushing our not ourselves, but our right to be in these spaces. Mm-hmm. And I think that we should really push for more. And I think that we should not stop, because we really do have to be in those spaces where decisions are being made.
Thank you. This is a very powerful message. I think we are, as youth, we are innovators and we should be on the decision-making tables. Of course, you also mentioned that means national policymakers, they have to recognize this, and we have to give pressure on them or convince them? That leads to my question to Nora, because you do work on outreach and lobbying communication. So what does that mean to you to officially integrate youth in international climate negotiations, or what kind of work we can do try to convince our policymakers?
Thank you. Thank you for the question. I do agree and acknowledge that there's no negotiator here, and there is no representation and on the negotiating floor, and the constituency model only works to an extent. It doesn't really give that meaningful power into the process. I do. I think it's really, really important to go back and tell a story I want to tell first. It will be really quick. So I do remember being a kid, and when the language of climate change was very, very different, when we spoke about CFCs and global warming and things like that. And then there was Kyoto Protocol and all of that, and we all made a lot of laws and we dealt with an issue. That's what I remember, and we were good at it. And then I don't know what happened to multilateralism when it came to environmental issues. It just feels like there was a gap, and then came the Paris Agreement. But when I look back and when I ask the people, my parents' generation and everybody, and the current leading negotiators from global majority country, what happened? And the answer, nobody has the answer. I was like, yeah, that's true, there is a gap. And my observation, and this is just like another story, is that the young people back then who grew up with that story in the background of the Kyoto Protocol and the global warming, they grew up and they became negotiators, they became delegates and were heavy lifters to get the Paris Agreement done. So that's a really good story to remember the power of young people. It's not only at this moment, it's also years down the line. If we really want to make this work, we have to think short term and long term. So in the short term, I think, first, countries can have a young people engagement strategy, a public engagement strategy in their own countries at a national level, and ask the young people, what do you want us to achieve at COP? And ask the young people, if I make this promise as a leader at COP, how are we going to implement that so that we get out of this, cycle of leaders come here, make big promises, and the promises are not honored because there is no political or social mandate in the countries. So youth becomes the majority voters in a couple of years' time to implement those promises and pledges. So that's a long term and a short term. And another thing is, a lot of civil society organizations and private sector organizations come to the green zone, to blue zone, to do what we are doing. I'm doing a whole day of doing this. But what people like me can do is offer young people the chance to come and shadow me, to come and just, mingle and help them make connections, just have that, almost like that. I'm here, you're a young person, you're here alone, I'll show you, you can follow me. So that is also a form of activity and engagement that we can do.
Great, thank you. I think it's nice to point out we need a short-term but also long-term strategy and think about what we can do and think about the future. So let me turn my question to Mariana, because we know you've done a lot of work also to advise your national government. That means you already got some access to the decision-making processes. So based on your experiences, what are the necessary steps you think that should be taken to ensure that young people or youth can meaningfully engage in the UNFCCC processes and also national decision-making processes?
First, I need to say that me and my government, we have a hate and love relationship because I'm advising them, I'm suing them, so, but it's part of democracy. But I have to say that the number of young people around the world is increasing, and by 2030, the number of young people will reach 1.3 billion. It means 7% of the world population. And in the last months, we've been discussing 3 words: meaningful youth engagement. And it was a lot discussed during the UN Summit of the Future. And I was I went to Google and I searched like, what does this mean and why is this different of engaging youth people in the public process or the decision-making process? So, according to the United Nations, meaningful youth engagement refers to the active and substantial participation of young people in decision-making and policy-making process. And you can say, okay, we already know this. But in September, the UN Secretary General, he wrote a policy brief on meaningful youth engagement. And I want to share with you some principles that he wrote and some principles that I principles that I transpose to the national level. So I can give you some measures of what can we do at international and national level. So the first principle is institutional mandated. So inviting young people should be formally compulsory. The second is resourced. So adequate funding must be accessible to all. Third, reciprocal accountability. Information on how young people's contributions have been utilized and interpreted should be available by those responsible for the process. And four, youth as partners. So young people should be recognized as partners and their involvement facilitated. So a few weeks ago, my NGO sent a policy brief to our own government, telling them what means involving young people in, for example, a COP process. And we asked for youth delegation, so we should have a law or a directive or something stating that, for example, 10% of the delegation should be young people, or at least 10 or 15 or 20 young people should be at the national delegation. The second is, for example, as we already have the parity law for gender equality in Europe at the parliament, we should have it for young people too. We should make sure that young people are elected and represented. And the last one is to promote the meaningful participation of marginalized groups, because we cannot talk about young people as young people is like a box or like everyone is the same, because it's not. And there is some young people with access to politics and the public process, but these young people are the privileged young people. They are the same that are already in power. So we also need to make sure that the marginalized population and communities are in the public process too.
Thank you for sharing these principles and suggesting some specific steps or measures that we can take, or at least to advise our government to take. We can see some promising signs, for example, in your country, and hopefully we'll see more. So last but not least, I think, Millie, I'll come to you to talk a little bit about our film. So can you share us more about the call to action made by the ActNowFilm to officially integrate youth in international climate policy or negotiations?
So ActNowFilm has been running for 4 years, and this year we have a specific call to action, and it's to officially integrate youth within international climate negotiations. And we have this call to action that we put to both young people who are interviewed in the film, and Mariana and Marielle were young people that were in the film, that we asked this question: what does it mean to you to officially integrate young people within climate negotiations? And it's important to ask that to youth, because there was a great checklist that Mariana just provided to us, and that's important to understand, that we need to ask youth what their interpretation and their feelings towards that is, so that we can ensure that within the delegation, young voices are heard when it comes to asking what that means. But essentially what's really important is also ensuring that more young people are integrated within parties at COP. So there's been an increase in badges provided to young people who will be in the party delegations. But a lot of the time that tends to be just listening in and not actively participating. So it's important not only to increase the badges for young people to work with within their delegations, but also to ensure that they can be in the negotiation room and maybe actually say something within the negotiations and influence negotiations and have a more active role. So it's not just enough to tick a box and say we've got youth there. It's also really important for official integration of youth within climate negotiations to provide the capacity, to provide skills that are essential for youth to understand the COP process, but also to feel like they have the skills to influence negotiations, to be able to speak with confidence about a specific area of policy that they're interested in and that they feel like their value and motivation feeds into, and they want to make that change for their own community. So that's important, is that essentially there are the skills provided. So there should be training programs that should be provided to youth who are selected to go to COP, who will be in those parties. But it's also important to ensure that this capacity and the skills are extended beyond those negotiating teams that are youth or supported in there. It's important that these platforms, that these resources and skills are provided and translated so that globally youth can access these resources for capacity and skills to understand, and also to have the skills to actively participate in the UNFCCC process with COPs. What's also crucial is funding. To even get here as a young person, to get funding is so difficult. And I've had messages on my phone from amazing individuals that I've met at COP28, and they've told me they didn't get a badge or they didn't get funding. So I think it's important to provide funding to youth so that youth can actively be in the room, and also to essentially pay youth for their work as well. Because a lot of the time, youth feel like their work isn't being honoured, and I think it's important not just to provide funding but also to pay youth for their time, for their expertise of a community. And that's essentially what this film is trying to do, is to highlight that we really need to take crucial steps to officially integrate youth within climate negotiations. So I definitely recommend that you go watch the film. We'll talk about this later in the final slides, but please do watch the film, because we have these amazing speakers sitting here on the panel with me who have really moved me, and they've moved all of you here in the crowd as well, because they're amazing stories. And that's what this film is trying to do, is highlight not only this call to action, but also to show that through storytelling and through narrative. And that's one of the key skills that I illuminated in the previous section when I spoke about the skills that are important for youth to understand. And these youth here are climate leaders in their own right, and it's such a privilege to be sitting next to you, to hear your stories and to have worked with them through this film. So I recommend that you watch the full film. It will be shown for the first time on the 16th of November in the Capacity Hub. It will also be accessed online as well through YouTube. So when it's out, please do share it with your networks. Please do watch it. Thank you very much for being here to watch the trailer, and I'll hand it over for a summary and for some conclusions.
Thank you, Millie, and I'm sure everyone now wants even more to watch the film, but I think these call to actions we should remember and think about how we can really push forward. And also thanks to all panelists to sharing your experiences and thoughts. I think we have a little bit more time. Maybe we can take some questions from audience. I think I would encourage our audience. Yeah, we have hands up. So please briefly introduce yourself and ask your questions. Mike?
Yeah, thank you very much, Sun. And want to acknowledge and congratulate our panelists for the conversation this afternoon. Very enlightened indeed, and we can feel even soon the energy topic and the views coming in from the youth delegation. My name is Mr. Sai Navoti. I presently work for the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs. We are hosting this pavilion. I look at the Small Island Developing States constituency. And before I was in this present responsibility, I was also a climate negotiator. The Alliance of Small Island States, and I also a lead negotiator for G77, and also the president of the COP23 Fiji. So I have lived through this process, observed it both as a member state, now as a United Nations organizations, observing the proceedings. So I have some battle scars over the years, and we have felt no shortage of youth, and it is their involvement really that keeps driving driving the momentum of these negotiations. But I fear one thing, that you might just be like our generations of negotiators, where we'll just be ending up talking about talking and talking about action and attempting actions without realizing the full potential. I think for our youth, and I'm looking at it from a small island perspective, you know what the secret is? We have to teach our youth how to go through, dismantle the international financial architecture. That is where the clog is. Once you go through that and get money coming in, the international financial architecture today doesn't recognize certain countries, doesn't look into the vulnerabilities of countries, doesn't look into the realities of countries, exogenous factors that affect those countries in order for them to at least can borrow money and use it for sustainable development. If you look into the world right now and the allocations of resources, you look into the money that goes to climate and goes to development, it's a small circle like this. While money for security actually is almost as big as this wall. This is where the real problem is. And we should, right now, tell our youth to start looking into it. And some of you young ones now with the intelligence and the brain start moving into the space, looking into that and see how that could assist this process. Because this is where the thinking and the talking is done. That is where the money is. That will realize what we are talking about. And it's not working. That needs to be bended. Thank you.
Thank you. That's an interesting question. I think it's really to think about how youth can do to reform our international financial system. Maybe some of our panelists want to react. Marina?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. And thank you so much for being here as well, for listening to us and for hosting this pavilion, to have youth a space like this, to have a platform to actually be heard in our in what we want to say and our stories. I think there is a lot of challenge, and I feel like there's so much that we can do as a youth, but we're also limited. A lot of my peers, when I survived Super Typhoon Haiyan in the Philippines, a lot of my peers actually was not able to go back to school. We were all climate activists at first, but then a lot of us went to big cities in order to work to provide for our families. Imagine rebuilding your house 10 times per year. Imagine losing your loved ones in every disaster. How are you going back to that disasters and actually be able to get back better when you've always been surviving every other disaster? We want to be part of this process. But I guess for me, we want the support of our government and the UN. A lot of UN events are not paid. If the youth are going there, they're not supported. You can be part of this UN event if you can go by yourself. There is no funding for the youth to be part of this UN event. I guess for me, how can the UN be also a spokesperson to us to also move forward, advance the need of the youth? So our own governments, if they know that the UN is actually backing us up, would actually take us seriously as well. The Philippines doesn't have that much funding. The government cannot even afford those that are in the government to come here in this COP. How are they able to allocate the funding to a youth? We need more sources outside. And the Philippines and other vulnerable nations need to have a space like this, because not just we're humanizing science, we're also unfairly bearing the brunt of the climate crisis that we did not cause, just like a lot of Pacific Island nations, just like a lot of vulnerable nations. Yet we have been persisting our voices to be heard. We have been persisting our space to have a space in this kind of events, and that is not that easy to get that. We need to make sure that we plan ahead of time to talk to a lot of organizations to fund us to be here, so our voices could be listened to. if no one would ever believe like in us in a way that they will fund us here, we will not be here.
Yeah.
I am here right now not because SDG has, paid for my flight to be here. We have already asked a lot of organizations to support us to be here. But if they did not support us, I will not be here talking to you and sharing my perspective. So I think it's very important that we also get that kind of support from our elders and from the UN and our government, so that we can actually be, like, we can all actually have that, we can actually exercise our full potential in this kind of processes.
Great. Nora, I think you also want to share some thoughts.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. I think it's really important point to note and to have the conversation. Absolutely. I just want to draw Article 12 out here at this point. Article 12 is Action for Climate Empowerment, which is Article 6 of the Convention and Article 12 of the Paris Agreement, and it has 6 elements. It's education, public awareness, training, public participation, public access to information, international cooperation. Now, ACE negotiations don't receive a lot of resourcing for the very reason that SIDS and LDC countries cannot afford a full delegation. Therefore, they can't prioritize it. Understandably, they have to prioritize climate finance. And therefore, it's easy for countries that can afford a negotiator and a delegation to ignore Article 12. It's very easy to do that. So I think, again, we need to come back to storytelling and making space for young people to come and not just, be given an opportunity to speak on the stage, but also not note taking, but be able to come consecutively throughout year and year after, so they understand, they create the story of COP, because COP is not one event. Things don't get agreed in one event in 1 year. So what is the COP story? What is the young people's COP story? What is the story of the negotiators? These are the stories that we need to be telling. Who are the best storytellers in the world using technology and all of that? Young people. So I think we're missing a trick here by not engaging with young people effectively, and by ignoring the article, not giving enough attention to the article that gives truth and power to young people.
Yeah, this is very important points. I think we have to think about how to realize the full potential of youth action. I'm just looking at our audience if there are another question here. So yeah, maybe we'll just ask together, and then we can see how. Yeah, we just invite everyone to ask you a question.
Hi, thanks so much to each of the panelists for telling their stories about how they got here. I had a question for Mariana, please. When you have been working on climate litigation, wondering, is it mainly like domestic laws you draw upon, or more international agreements that have you found more useful in bringing climate actions against the government and possibly companies? I don't know if you've had involvement in that as well. Thanks.
Can you just tell you who you are? Tell us who.
Yeah, of course. I'm Luna, and I'm from Jersey.
Okay, thank you. We'll save that question, Mariana. You take that question, then we pass to the next.
Hi everyone, my name is Camilla from Italy. I'm the G20 youth delegate for the European Union for the climate change track. And I actually wanted some practical tips from your experiences on how to convince and address our own government on having, for example, a youth advisor on climate issues. Because I think the most tricky aspects is how to start the conversation to them. So any practical tips from your experience? Thank you.
Good question. Practical tips. Think about that.
Hi, thank you for the opportunity. My name is Aishat Ebardi. I'm the Honorable Commissioner Environment and Climate Change from Taraba State of Nigeria. Mine is not really a question, it's a comment. I just want to inform this meeting that or event that for the first time in the history of Nigeria, especially northern Nigeria, that about 70% of the cabinet involves youths. That is, our governor is promoting youth involvement, youth engagement, and women. 30% of the cabinet are women. About 7 of us out of 22 are women commissioners of relevant sectors. So I just want us to remember that some people really recognize the fact that women and youth are very, very crucial in this transition, especially in this developing and changing world. If you want to really make difference in this innovative world, you have to involve the youth. So I just want to align with the panelists. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that great news. I think it's great to hear that. And of course, we want to see more progress in Nigeria, but also other places. So maybe Mariana, you can take the question first.
Thank you very much for your question. So United States, climate litigation was born in the United States. And in Portugal, it started 1 year ago with the action that we filed in the civil courts. So what we had to do actually was to build a case on international law, European law, and international cases. And then we went to the national law that was not being complied with. So, but this is a general tip. If you want to do climate litigation and if you want to make a strong case, you have to put examples of other countries, of other cases, and also relate the national law with international and European law. If you are in Europe, but it can be used to. Like I'm now building a case on lithium exploration, lithium mining, and I'm using cases of South America to build my case in Portugal. So I hope I can answer your question with this answer. And I would just give like a small tip to the other question. So I'm in a huge fight with my government to have young people at negotiations because they don't want young people here. I asked for the second time, for the second COP, if my NGO and the young people of my NGO that work very hard every day, if we could be in the national delegation, and they said no. No, point. Without any justification, they don't even try to give like an argument or try to justify why they don't want young people in the national delegation. I try to define some answers, but the thing is, my tip is, you are not going to be invited, and if you know how to initiate the discussion, you'll have to break the door. Like, they will not open the door to initiate this discussion, especially if you are a young woman trying to be in these spaces, because again, young people are not the same. If you are a woman, it's different than being like a young boy asking to be at the national delegation. So yeah, my tip is don't be shy and know your potential and recognize your work. And actually, I've been trying to tell this to myself, like, I deserve to be here, not only because I'm young, but because I am competent and I'm a professional in international law in my case. So that's my tip. So don't let others tell you that you're not worthy to be here, and especially not your government. Yeah.
Maybe others want to share, but be confident. That's very important. So, any other tips, practical tips?
Okay. I think there's really a power number. And I've found that our governments listen most if we say like 500 youth have signed to this and we need a youth representation in your delegation. It is very important that you just don't talk about yourself, but talk to like majority of the youth. How are you bringing the issues of the youth to your government and making sure that their voice would also be heard through you and through your group? In the Philippines, we did the LCOY, Local Conference of Youth, before, where we have capacitated 300 youth from all over the Philippines, and we have made national youth statement, and we have submitted it to our government. In the national youth statement, you could put on there that one of the demands of the youth is to have a representation in the delegation. And that doesn't mean that the youth could be the note taker of the delegation, that they actually are consulted in the negotiation agenda, that they're actually consulted whenever there is a shift in how they negotiate as a country. It is important that we have our demands in there and how they are bringing that into the nation's agenda. So I think it's really important. Like the power of number is very important here.
Okay. Very briefly, or
we've recently. This is a very recent thing we started, where we give the opportunity for young people from a global majority country to be mentored and shadow and mentor and show and give them opportunities in the work we do at Climate Outreach. This was complete coincidence, but a story I love is that in Maldives, young people have a mock COP. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of nods, and from there they select 2 young people. And this year and last year I had 2 young people shadowing me. I'm going to give the same tips and advice I give them. Be confident. We've heard all of that. This is your space. This is your future. You matter. Just having a mentor, finding a mentor, that's really important, I would say, the first thing. And the second thing is I try to focus their first learning to be the geography, almost the real estate that happens around COP, different zones and the purposes of it and the different skills around it, and letting them be exposed to everything and giving them space and time to see where you gravitate. Not everybody gravitates towards negotiation or activism or direct action or advocacy. So, there's another reframing and a storytelling that we need to do in terms of, what is the best step. It's not just one thing. There is many things. So that's the best tip I can give.
Great. I think I'm mindful of time, so I think we need to wrap up. So to end our panel, I'll give a very challenging task to each of our participants. I think previously I want to give you 1 minute. Now you may only have 30 seconds to leave some advice to young people who want to engage or lead climate action and also other SDGs, but also your message to policymakers on how to better integrate young people into policy decisions. Maybe we'll start from this side. Millie, if you want. Just very briefly.
For youth, I give advice to break down that door, to know that you have the skills, that you have the confidence to speak in spaces, to influence climate negotiations. Have the confidence and the reassurance in yourself that you do have a voice in COP processes, that you can push and demand that voice to increase that, to ensure that youth can have that space. I think it's important for youth, if you do feel like you need to increase your skills and your knowledge in space, to ask and build those connections with youth, to ask questions regarding what is this term in negotiations. I think it's important to ask questions if you're unsure about what's going on in the negotiation room. We only have 30 seconds, so I'm going to go faster. But for policymakers, please do not just listen to youth, but you need to integrate them officially within negotiations. You need to ensure that they're not just note takers, but they actually have the space and the platform to have influence within these policy spaces. And please be mentors. Be mentors to youth. Please make sure that you have them by your side and you don't just put them on your Facebook with photos, but please do make sure that you bring them alongside you through the negotiations.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So young people, I would say that, I would add actually, if you cannot be integrated in the national delegation because your government deny it, I would do as I did actually last week. I would draft a press release, send it to the media starts to ask questions, and in 15 minutes I will give a policy brief on youth engagement to my environmental minister in the Pavilion of Portugal, so she knows how she can engage young people if she doesn't know it yet. And to policymakers, we are discussing here my future, the future of my children, our future, the future of young people. And if we are not engaged, what we are discussing, I don't know, but...
Good.
Yeah.
I think my advice to youth is just always remember that your voice is powerful and it is very needed. Be teachable, network. Reach out to people. Reach out to organizations, to mentors, to negotiators, to your government. Even just learning how they started is very, very important. And also, most importantly, don't be discouraged of the complexities of this process. It is very complex, but we will never learn if we don't ask. We will never learn if we don't study the process. And I think my advice to the policymakers, if they're listening and if they're up to it, is to make sure that we diversify the opportunities for the youth. That we just don't focus on one sector of the youth or like one group of the youth, but we actually give opportunities to different groups of the youth. And after we engage one youth, we just don't let them go and forget about them, right? We have to engage more the youth in a sustainable way, but make sure that we also diversify the opportunity, that we reach out to those youth who doesn't have that kind of opportunities. Yeah.
Thank you.
Very brief. I'll first go with policy makers. There is a wealth of amount of knowledge and research that proves that when you engage with people, policy adoption and implementation is much easier. So engage with young people, engagement strategy, engage with young people to create effective policies that will be accepted by young people faster. Let's not forget, in a few years, they will be the adults. And also to policymakers that let's just be honest, we've been doing this for a number of years. We haven't solved it. So surely we don't have all the answers. So let's ask the people who have learned knowledge and from a very different way we learned as kids. So the imagination is bigger. And for the young people, I just have very few words to say. You're our hope and inspiration. That's all.
Thank you so much. Let's give a round of applause to all panelists. Thank you for all your insightful thoughts, and also thanks to everyone to come to today's event. So before we end, I want to remind everyone, the premiere of the ActNowFilm will take place in the Capacity Building Hub on the 16th of November, just in a few days, and starting at 5:15 p.m. So if you want to watch the full film, please make sure you join this premiere. Thank you.